Sup, you beautiful bastards. Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show, your daily dive into the news, and I have a weird, big show for you today. Like, there's just a range from small and weird and wacky to immensely consequential. So let's dive through it together. You hit that like button and I will hit you with the monkey, and let's just jump into it.
This is a news show.
What's one move in bed that makes a man go crazy every time?
Oh, you gotta give him that hawk too and spit on that thing. You get me?
So that is American hero Haktua Girl, otherwise known as Haley Welch. And if you're even remotely on the internet, you've probably seen her over the past week or so, with it stemming from this man on the street video from Tim and D TV. And as far as why that clip went viral, you know, if you're like me, you just love seeing people passionate about their hobbies. Also, plenty of husbands sending it to their wives going like,
"Ha, isn't this clip crazy? Isn't it funny and crazy what she said? Should you try that?"
Or for whatever reason, I don't know, there was just something fun about the clip. But also what comes with random out of nowhere fame is just people saying stuff. And there are a lot of false things being said about Haley among the true things. Like, for example, there were big claims that she was a preschool teacher and she lost her job over the clip. Or another one about how she signed with a major talent agency in Hollywood. Neither of those things are actually true. Though I think the one true thing I have seen is that she is making some money off of this. With Rolling Stone speaking to Jason Petit, who runs a family business in Tennessee called Fathead Threads, because he's actually known Haley for years. And when the clip went viral, he knew that there was some earning potential there. Saying, of course, she hasn't gotten a dime from the first viral video that went out. Nobody was asking permission for her to do nothing, neither. I just wanted her to get some profit off of this deal. And so his brand is now selling Haktua hats. And while it's unclear the amount Haley herself made from them, Jason told Rolling Stone they've sold 2,000 hats, which means at least $65,000 worth of merch has been sold. Though this is apparently there has been a downside. With Jason saying that Haley's been very overwhelmed by the fame, and she didn't want her face on the merch because she's had some crazy people reach out to her and it's hard to embrace this attention. With him saying he hopes she settles into it, saying it could be a blessing or a curse. But yeah, now you know way too much information about that one viral clip someone sent you a week ago. You're welcome. And then in another heavily requested but kind of quick story, Marques Brownlee, right, MKBHD, seems to be the least of Rabbit R1's worries right now. Because while a lot of the talk around the Rabbit R1 was focused on Marques, even though really he was just one of many reviewers who gave it a negative review, that has come and gone, and in its place, we're getting news about a potential security issue. Because a group of researchers claimed that it discovered 4 API keys in the company's code base which put sensitive information at risk. And The Verge explaining that the keys gave access to Rabbit's accounts with third-party services. And in a letter published this week, the researchers said that the keys allowed them to read every response every R1 device has ever given, even ones with personal information, claiming it got access back in May and saying that even though Rabbit was aware of the problem, the company ignored it. Though for its part, Rabbit said it only became aware of a potential issue on Tuesday, but added, based on this notice, the Rabbit security team rotated the keys to those APIs, which caused a brief downtime on the devices. Our team is continuing our investigation and saying, as of today, we have not found there to be any compromise of our critical systems or the safety of customer data. But then the researchers put out an update saying that Rabbit did not actually reset all the keys, explaining that in their first post, they chose to omit one of the keys they had gained access to, or saying there was a 5th key they kept secret and writing, "Surprise, surprise, despite their ongoing internal investigation, Rabbit didn't revoke it," and saying that at least as of yesterday, that key was still active, providing access to a history of emails sent on the R1 domain. And then we need to talk about cop news.
Cop news, cop news, cop news. What you gonna do is cop news. That's the name of the segment.
It is. And they are 2 drastically different stories. But the first one involving one of the most American things in the world, these guys. But if you flip off the wrong person, you know, freedom's gonna have consequences. And that's exactly what Gregory Bombard found out back in 2018. Or because apparently Vermont State Trooper Jay Riggin thought that he saw Bombard give him the finger. So he pulls the guy over and he gives him some lip.
No, it looked like you put me out when you were going by there. Yeah, it looked like you looked right at me and looked like you stuck your middle finger up in my face.
No, I was doing this. Yeah. You must be really sensitive as a trooper. Flipping you off.
First of all, I'm not an overly sensitive person, and it's the first time in 12 years I've ever stopped someone who I thought put me off, so I don't like that insinuation.
But it turns out that Riggin may at least have been a little overly sensitive. Because even if Bombard did do it, he has the right to do it under the First Amendment, with federal courts upholding it and verbal expletives if yelled. So, even Bombard could tell something was off and there was this interaction that happened.
So I have a question. If someone flips you off, What is the citation? What's the crime?
So, if somebody flips me off,
Yeah.
I don't know if they're signaling to try to get my attention because they need any assistance or they need to have a conversation. Because obviously it's not normal behavior, so I'm going to have that conversation.
In there, notice he really didn't answer the question. He just called the behavior abnormal, and being abnormal is not a crime. And to Riggins' credit, and it's a very low bar here because he shouldn't have pulled Bombard over in the first place, he lets him go without a citation. That is, until they get back into their cars, and this happened.
So as he pulled away, he called me an asshole and said, "Fuck you," with the bird.
A few moments later.
Okay, so now you're under arrest for disorderly conduct. Get out of the car. And put your hand behind your back.
Oh my God, sir.
With Riggin taking Bombard down to the station and locking him up for over an hour, according to his lawyers. And Riggin also having Bombard's car towed because it was parked in front of a no parking sign, even though that's where he pulled him over. With then Bombard's mugshot distributed to local media, and he was put through a whole year of criminal proceedings. And while the charge eventually got dismissed, this whole situation didn't just go away, right? The trouble wasn't over. Because after that video that you just saw went public back in December, the Vermont police took a lot of heat from a lot of angry people. So what did they do? Did they apologize? Eat a little humble pie? No, of course not. They fucking show up to Bombard's door on Christmas Day and they issue him another citation for disorderly conduct. Though fortunately, the local prosecutor refused to pursue those charges, so it was dropped. And what we saw is in the meantime, Bombard hit back with lawyers of his own from the ACLU and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, with him suing the state of Vermont in 2021. And this month, it actually finally settled, with him agreeing to pay $100,000 to Bombard and $75,000 in attorney's fees to the two advocacy groups. With now Bombard saying he's going to take that money and take out his 88-year-old mother out to dinner. Though notably, neither Riggin or the state had to admit to any wrongdoing. So while that is a little bit of justice, it doesn't seem like any of it should have fucking happened, which is why you can join me or not ending this story by giving a little gift to Officer Riggin. But one cop I would not flip off is this one out of New Jersey. I don't know if you've seen this video.
I got smoking conditions.
Right, that is Kevin Long, and what he finds inside of that apartment is an old 70-something couple trapped in the smoke.
Hey, you all right? You all right?
I can't get my husband.
It's fully engulfed, fully engulfed. All right, get out.
My husband.
Sir, where are you at? I can't see anything.
Right, and so then with his woman ushered outside to safety, our boy Kevin, he ventures deeper into the apartment, blindly searching for the man who you can hear yelling for help.
Central, he's entrapped. I can't get in there. The smoke's too bad.
Right, and this is when Kevin realizes the man's got a medical condition and he can't walk. But he's not in the wheelchair, so Kevin's got to get that out of the way first. But then that is when the man's wife starts trying to come back into the smoke to try to help her husband out. With Kevin having to be like, lady, I love you, I get it, but...
Move! Get out of my way!
With him getting rid of the wheelchair, diving back in, grabbing the man, dragging him outside before collapsing to the ground in a coughing fit. And then, because our boy Kevin, he is just a beast. He says his job's not done. He gets back up and he evacuates 16 other apartments. So luckily, the fire department showed up and contained the fire to just that one. And the worst of it is that the couple went to the hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. Kevin was also treated for smoke inhalation, but released shortly afterward, with him then getting honored by his department and telling NBC.
That would have probably lasted the rest of my career if I didn't get those guys out, and I would have replayed that in my mind every day.
Which is why Kevin is our BAMF of the day, and we can end on the note that in a world of Jay Riggins, be a Kevin. And then, getting older is interesting, because you'll notice on like the younger end of things, like there are more milestones. You can get your learner's permit at 15, your driver's license at 16, you can get cigarettes if you want to kill yourself at 18, 21, you can drink, 25, you can rent a car without an extra surcharge. And then there's kind of nothing for a while. That is until now, thanks to Marvin, Peyton, his wife, Tina. See, they just opened up a restaurant outside of St. Louis, Missouri called Bliss. It's an upscale Caribbean restaurant, a suburb. And see, Marvin, who's 36 years old, which is a key aspect of this, he's got the people talking about Bliss because they decided that there is going to be an age restriction, right? In order to eat there, women have to be over the age of 30 and men over 35. With Bliss's assistant manager saying the restaurant is just something for the older people to come do, have a happy hour, come to get some good food, and not have to worry about some of the young folks who bring some of that drama. And as far as Marvin and Tina, they said that this age restriction, like this has always been the plan, saying, you know, we don't have any problems with young people, we just want to focus on the older audience. But this policy has now received national attention and a mixed reaction, with many people also intrigued and asking about the difference in age requirements between men and women. In fact, according to Travis Crum, an associate law professor at Washington University, that may actually be illegal, saying Bliss could have set an age limit if it wanted to. That's because there's no restriction on discriminating on the basis of age in federal or state public accommodations law. However, what's problematic about Bliss's policy is that it uses a person's sex to determine what age limit applies to them. And the specific law may be violating the Missouri Human Rights Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination by race, color, national origin, religion, and also sex and gender. And while the Pates have reportedly consulted a couple of attorneys, they're still unsure how the law will apply to their private business. So they've said that they intend to stick by their rule and that they'll handle any legal challenges if and when they arise. But also, more generally, Bliss's age minimum, it's brought up the conversation around youngism, or rather ageism, but specifically for young people. With Michael North, a professor of management and operations at NYU who studies youngism, saying Bliss's rule unfairly assumes the behavior of an entire group of people, with him also arguing that ageism is the most socially condoned form of discrimination, saying the fact that this rule was even instituted and implemented in the first place really underscores how when it comes to age, for whatever reason, we don't treat it the same way that we do other demographic categories when it comes to worrying about exclusion, or on the flip side, fostering equality. Though there, the Pates reiterated they don't want to make young people feel excluded, with Tina saying it was never our intent to create this whole discrimination thing with age or gender, anything like that. This is just a personal preference that involved a lot of conversations that we've been in with our age group and felt like we were answering a demand. And so one, of course, I'd love to know your thoughts on this story, but also two, I don't think I actually have an issue with them setting an age limit. Right? They're a private business. It's not like it's a public utility. But I am thrown a little off by the different age requirements if you're a man or a woman. Like, it feels like maybe the original plan was it's 30 and up, and then Marvin was like, oh, but I hate Greg, and Greg's 32. Fuck Greg, but also I don't want him to know that he gets under my skin. Boom, got it. Random ass different age requirement. And then, triple digit temperatures, they are here. And with all the summer activities, I'm being serious, you gotta stay hydrated. And as y'all know, I'm a huge fan of the longtime sponsor and partner of the show, Liquid IV. You know, it has 3 times the electrolytes you get from the leading sports drink, which is what I need when I sweat. So I bring Liquid IV sticks with me for beach days, pool days, which I find myself reaching for the pina colada flavor. And I always bring an extra stick on my hikes. And every stick delivers superior hydration, more than water alone, with real mouth-watering flavors helping endurance and vitality. And I'm loving Liquid IV's sugar-free flavors. They're refreshing, they taste great, and they have 0 sugar and 0 artificial sweeteners. And the Hydration Multiplier sugar-free packs, they meet your sweet cravings without the sugar guilt, and most importantly, it keeps you hydrated. Also, gotta throw it out there, raspberry melon is delicious. But more importantly, staying hydrated is crucial to regulating body temperatures, keeping joints lubricated, helping deliver nutrients to cells that so much. So you just tear, pour, shake, and drink. So no matter what you're doing this summer, if you're outside, hydrate on the go with Liquid IV's Multiplier sugar-free pack. And for a limited time only, listen up, use my discount code DeFranco to get 30% off your order. Just click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen and use code DeFranco. And then, this situation in Bolivia is wild. Like with a capital W. A Bolivian general got arrested on live TV for mounting a coup. And specifically, I'm talking about General Juan Jose Zuniga, who yesterday afternoon led military units into the main square in the administrative capital of La Paz. Or we saw armored vehicles ramming the palace door as soldiers try to make their way into the building, with then President Luis Arce calling on the public to organize and mobilize in defense of democracy. And the two of them reportedly later seen confronting each other in a dramatic standoff in a palace hallway, with Arce ordering the general to withdraw his soldiers and stand down. And sure enough, the soldiers ended up pulling back along with the military vehicles, ending the apparent coup after just a few hours. And with that, we saw hundreds of Arce's supporters rushing to the square outside the palace, waving Bolivian flags, singing the national anthem, and cheering, with the general then being handcuffed and forced into a police car, and the triumphant Arce raising a fist to the crowds that had gathered, signaling the defeat of this attempted coup. And if you look at that and you go, this seems to have played out way too perfectly for Arce. Well, here's the thing. You may be right, because there's a twist. See, as he was being arrested, the general effectively claimed that the whole thing was staged, saying he was actually acting on Arce's instructions, telling reporters, on Sunday, I met with the president, and the president told me the situation was very fucked, that this week would be critical. And so it's necessary to prepare something to bring up my popularity. And so he asked me, shall we take out the armored vehicles? Because the key thing is that Arce is currently having a fight with the former president, right? Evo Morales, and it's for control of the ruling party ahead of elections coming up in 2025. And all of this playing out as the country's in the midst of an economic crisis as well. And on top of all that, the general's not the only one claiming that all of this was staged, with Andrea Barrientos, a senator for the opposition, telling BBC, what happened today in Bolivia is a really bizarre situation. We can confirm that this was a self-coup organized by Luis Arce's government. Though to be clear, even though this is very, very strange, we haven't seen evidence to back those claims up. Not to mention that all of this came a day after the general was actually removed from his role as commander of the Bolivian army. And on top of that, right, his other comments as he was being arrested, they suggested that, he was unsatisfied with Arce's leadership, telling reporters, we want to restore democracy. The people have no future, and the army has the courage to look out for the future of our children, the well-being and progress of our people. Which is why we saw the country's justice minister saying, the general lies and seeks to justify himself in a decision that is his and for which he will be held accountable in court. And going on to say that they will seek to sentence the general to the maximum possible prison sentence for these crimes, which is 15 to 20 years in prison for having attacked democracy and the Constitution. And then the Supreme Court over the last few days has been like Kendrick Lamar dropping disses, except it's decisions. Like just one after another after another. Except instead of ruining the day for one Canadian, it's stuff that impacts millions and millions of Americans. Well, I'm not gonna be going over everything because I don't want to put you to sleep. I am gonna hit on the highlights and tell you what you should know. Starting with how the Supreme Court blocked the Purdue Pharma opioid settlement, which notably could upend billions of dollars victims were supposed to get. And while that sounds horrible, the court decided 5-4 along non-ideological lines that the settlement also included inappropriate legal protections for the Sackler family. Right, so on the one hand, this could halt bankruptcy proceedings, but on the other, it leaves the door open for those scumbag Sacklers to be sued and possibly face a little more justice. Then, in a decision this morning, the court also limited the power of the Securities and Exchange Commission to go after fraudsters, right, because the SEC up until today had been able to impose fines based on in-house reviews. And this was explicitly allowed by Congress, but the 6 conservative justices agreed with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that this violated the 7th Amendment, right, which guarantees a right to a jury trial. Though the liberal justices disagreed, pointing to the fact that when agencies do this, they're going after people for civil offenses, not criminal ones. And you have critics fearing this could make it harder to police fraud and protect investors while backlogging the courts even more. But as it stands, this is a huge blow to the power of federal agencies and their ability to enforce rules, which notably is a huge thing that conservative groups have been trying to make happen for years. And this is the second time recently the court's done this, with the other involving the ATF's ability to ban bump stocks. Right, and there, the court gutted the agency's ability to interpret a statute, which is something agencies have long relied on. Then, in a really interesting one, we saw Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Barrett siding with the liberal justices on a case about whether the Biden administration could force social media companies to combat misinformation about things like COVID-19, with Republican attorney generals in Louisiana and Missouri alongside some social media users claiming that the government was coercing social media brands over the issue and limiting users' First Amendment rights. But writing for the majority, Barrett pointed out that none of the plaintiffs could show they had standing to even bring the issue to court and failed to show what direct harm they suffered. And on top of that, she mentioned that, quote, the platforms acting independently had strengthened their pre-existing content moderation policies before the government defendants got involved. But Justice Alito wasn't happy with the court dodging ruling on First Amendment issues due to a lack of standing and argued that the government's actions were blatantly unconstitutional. However, there was a big issue to the Republican argument in general. Not only did they fail to show standing, but they failed to show even concrete examples of the government actually coercing social media companies. So Alito and friends said that was because it was so subtle. And then finally, we saw the court surprise everyone when the same 3 conservatives jumped ship and made a decision on the abortion case that left room for the procedure in emergency situations. Although the decision was really a non-decision, and I'll explain. Right, Idaho had enacted one of the most restrictive abortion bans in the nation, but it conflicted with a federal law that allowed abortions in emergency situations, including non-life-threatening ones. And a lower court had temporarily blocked Idaho from stopping abortions like that until the case was ruled on, with Idaho then pushing the issue to the Supreme Court, which decided it shouldn't have actually considered the case at all. And instead, it'll just let the lower court's decision stand and it'll wait for the court to make a final decision there. And this notably wasn't exactly an outcome that all the justices in the majority were happy with. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, for example, wanted the court to actually make a decision on abortion access itself, especially because it just temporarily blocks the Idaho law. And it's very likely that regardless of what the circuit court decides, the issue is going to make its way back up to the Supreme Court to actually decide on abortion access in the situation, which is why she wrote, today's decision is not a victory for pregnant patients in Idaho. It is delayed. While this court dawdles and the country waits, pregnant people experiencing emergency medical conditions remain in a precarious position as their doctors are kept in the dark about what the law requires. But then finally, in what many have described as the biggest decision thus far, the court ruled that while bribery was illegal, gratuities were not. Right, and at the center of this is a federal law called Section 666, which bars local, state, and tribal officials from corruptly accepting anything of value of any person intending to be influenced or rewarded for an official act. Right, so if you're a state official, you can't do something and be rewarded for it. Or actually, according to the 6 conservative justices, you can as long as you're rewarded after the fact and you didn't have an agreement in the first place, like with what happened with James Snyder, the former mayor of Portage, Indiana, back in 2013. Because during that time, he awarded the truck company Great Lakes Peterbilt a government contract and he bought trucks off of them. And afterwards, he had asked for and received $13,000 from them. He was then arrested and sentenced to 21 months in prison for corruption for violating Section 666. But then somehow he managed to convince the Supreme Court that all of this was legal because he asked for the money after the contracts were awarded, not before. And in their majority opinion, Kavanaugh laid out 6 reasons for their decision, with them starting by pointing out that Section 666 was modeled after federal bribery statutes and not ones that bar gifts. So therefore, it was clearly not meant to apply to gifts. He also pointed to how Congress amended the law in 1986 to further resemble the federal bribery ban and not the gifts ban, which makes it, quote, highly unusual, if not unique, for Congress to have a law that applies to two separate crimes with different sets of elements. With that last part feeding into his fourth argument, which was that since they have different punishments, Congress didn't mean for Section 666 to apply to both, right? They were also really worried about how this federal law could conflict with local ones. For example, quote, a county official could meticulously comply with their county's local gratuities rules, say by declining a $200 gift card but accepting a $100 gift card from a neighbor as thanks for her diligent work on a new park, would still face up to 10 years in federal prison because she accepted a thing of value in connection with an official act. And finally, they had issues with the fact that Section 666, if applied to gifts, was apparently too vague about when someone was inappropriately accepting a gift, with the conservatives kicking the issue back to Congress and saying if they want to criminalize this, they can draft a new law. And as far as the liberal justices, they were exasperated by the decision, with Jackson writing that the law clearly covered gifts because, quote, the term rewarded easily covers the concept of gratuities paid to corrupt officials after the fact, no upfront agreement necessary. She also pointed out that the law was, quote, not designed to apply to teachers accepting fruit baskets, soccer coaches getting gift cards, or newspaper delivery guys who get a tip at Christmas. Instead, saying it was clearly laid out that it applied to local officials who receive at least $10,000 a year from federal programs, and only when they accept the gift corruptly, among many other reasons. You know, as it stands now, there is no federal statute keeping you from bribing or not bribing, giving after the fact to a state official who just so happened to do something you like. You know, as long as they didn't know you were going to do it, wink, wink. And so you have many saying this decision, it ignores how influence works. They're saying it's rarely an explicit agreement. Instead, it's like a buildup of gifts and under-the-table understandings. Something that justices like Thomas and Alito, maybe they have some experience with, which is also why we saw so many people clowning on the court for this decision. With people saying things like with the Supreme Court Snyder decision, it is made clear that bribery has a green light for elected officials if it happens after the official act. The court, with utter chutzpah for its own ethical misconduct, is saying ethics don't matter in governing. Big money can rule. What a disgrace. As well as I'm not the only one thinking that if justices were not hip deep in smelly billionaire gifts and gratuities, they might not be rewriting anti-corruption laws to protect public officials receiving smelly gifts and gratuities. And others just kind of shocked at how the court compared Snyder's $13,000 payout to a tip a waiter might receive after a meal. And it should also be noted that a lot of people kind of felt like this meant that the justices were claiming they'll be able to claim their own bribes as gifts and therefore everything can be legal. But again, what we're talking about with this specific case, it only applies to local, state, and tribal officials. Or there are separate federal laws for federal officials. But yeah, long story short, the Supreme Court has been very busy this week. And then, like it or not, companies are collecting, aggregating, and trading your personal information without your permission. But also with the chaos of life, who has the time, right? Who has the time or the patience to actually request these data brokers to delete that information? Well, you know who does? Partner and sponsor of the PDS, Incogni. They're the experts who can handle this for you. Because with as little as a phone number, old address, or name to start them off, complete strangers can buy records containing an alarming amount of your sensitive information. And Incogni automatically takes your personal data off the market by reaching out to data brokers on your behalf, requesting your personal data removal, and dealing with their objections. And I mean, when I signed up for Incogni, I immediately saw how many data brokers had my information. I mean, it was ridiculous. But within a week, they'd already started their reach out and were having them scrubbed out, 206 and counting. And Incogni's saved me over 154 hours, not to mention my sanity if I'd done this myself. So if you don't like the idea of some rando finding out where you live or work, Incogni is the service that you need to keep your personal information private. So do what you can to take control back. Just go to incogni.com/DeFranco and use code DeFranco for 60% off. That's incogni.com/DeFranco and use code DeFranco to get your personal data off the market. And then
Ozempic, it's in the news.
Ow!
Can I get sued for that?
Either way, it's in the news because of doctors. Because even though obesity is one of the leading health issues in the country, impacting 42% of adults, a very small amount of doctors are fully trained to treat it. With, for example, a 2020 survey finding that medical schools spend an average of 10 hours on obesity education, and most are not in a hurry to increase it. And places like Axios noting that under 1% of the country's physician workforce has actually been certified by the American Board of Obesity Medicine, which is a startling figure when weight loss drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro are exploding in popularity. I mean, back in May, Novo Nordisk said that 25,000 people are starting Wegovy every single week. And a lot of the people taking these drugs might not feel like they're getting the help that they need with them, right? Because as it turns out, they're incredibly finicky and impact everyone differently. But seeing things like an obesity doctor telling Axios that there's just a lot of room for error in prescribing them because patients are supposed to be monitored while on them, right? And their doses and the side effects, they need to be managed, as do diet and exercise plans. Right? You can't just do the injection and call it a day. It's not that easy. And if an untrained doctor is not giving the right support and the patient in turn is using the drug wrong, it can actually make the problems worse, right? Because because the side effects with these drugs, they can be wide-ranging if they're not managed. You know, a fair amount of patients, they deal with nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation. You have others dealing with fatigue. Studies have also found small amounts of people just can't tolerate the drug and they have to stop. And then on top of all that, because there have been shortages of the drug, some people have to go on and off it or fluctuate their dosage. And that is just this whole other thing to deal with and monitor. With Northwestern Medicine obesity specialist Robert Kushner telling Bloomberg there's a lot of hand-holding when it comes to prescribing these drugs and a lot of tweaking as time goes on. And you also had Lydia Alexander, the president of the Obesity Medicine Association, further explaining to Axios that patients likely require more specialized attention than they might be getting, saying as obesity becomes advanced and the conditions around it become more serious, it's harder to manage in a very busy primary care setting. And adding that primary care doctors, they need more training on obesity prevention and management, as well as saying the healthcare system at large needs more specialists for severe cases. Right, that way, primary care can handle it up to a point, but refer to a specialist when needed. And unfortunately, because a lot of people on these drugs feel like they're not getting the help that they need from the doctor's office, it ends up not being a surprise that they're turning to places like TikTok. Bloomberg noting this is especially the case from the growing number of people who are getting the drugs from telehealth companies, with many of them not providing much in service beyond putting the drugs in your hands. And I mean, some of the people are just left in the dark, with one doctor saying he's seen patients who ended up in the hospital from dehydration because they weren't told they need to drink more water on the medications. And some people haven't only found themselves with a lack of guidance, but with doctors who gave them potentially bad advice. Like one woman who said her primary care physician suggested she treat her nausea with a drug called Zofran, even though that drug could likely worsen the constipation she already had. So she just ended up managing it with tips she learned online. So we saw Bloomberg speaking to Jennifer Witherspoon, who's built a following of people who turn to her for advice on managing the side effects of weight loss drugs. And this, even though she's not a medical professional, but as she explained, I'm known as like the side effect girl. People have offered to pay me, begged me to start a podcast, asked me to call their sisters-in-law, wanted me to call their doctor. One lady even invited me to her wedding. She's a Mounjaro user herself, and as Bloomberg explained, her content is filling a void for a lot of people. And Witherspoon saying that many of the people who come to her, they got these drugs from non-obesity specialists, or people like OBGYNs who never told them what foods or behaviors could impact them. You know, it feels like it should go without saying, but medical professionals do not advise people to get their information on TikTok or social media, because misinformation can just thrive there. And there are cases where these online communities might be touting tricks that are unproven. Though, some doctors do say that a lot of the advice is positive. And in the case of someone like Witherspoon, she reminds people that she isn't a doctor, just someone with their own personal experience. And still, you know, a lot of people actually prefer to get their information from peers or online, especially if they've had bad experiences with the healthcare system in the past. Which, I mean, if you talk about people who have used the healthcare system and people wronged by the healthcare system, I think it would almost be a circle. But also, notably, people with obesity and weight issues often have an especially bad go in the healthcare system. Right? Weight stigmas exist everywhere, but they are very apparent in medical settings. So we end up seeing things like a 2019 survey of Canadian physicians finding that 33% feel frustrated with patients who have obesity, 27% believe that patients with obesity are often non-compliant with treatment recommendations, and 18% indicated feeling disgusted when treating a patient with obesity. And while other studies found that higher weight patients often have shorter appointment times, they get less patient-centered communication, and that doctors with weight stigmas often attribute a patient's issues to their weight without fully examining them or interrogating the problem, which, you know, can help you see why a lot of people are skeptical about doctors. And so when it comes to these new Ozempic-era drugs, and you add in the fact that most aren't trained in obesity, you can see how a patient's frustrations might add up quickly. And with that, we're seeing the doctors seeing these online conversations happening and these support groups on TikTok, and they actually want to be a part of them, especially those who do have expertise in obesity, because they want to make sure that people who have turned to social media are getting good information. With Daniel Rosen, a surgeon and obesity specialist who has over 58,000 followers, saying it's the next frontier, right? And explaining how he posts videos or responds to comments in between seeing patients. You know, with all this, if you're someone that's on the medication or you know someone that's on the medication, what has the experience been? Does this sound like it rings true to you? And for everyone else, of course, I'd just love to know your thoughts here. But then finally, today we'll close it out with a congratulations and talk about yesterday. The congratulations is to this week's SeatGeek prize winner. We're getting $500 towards any tickets on SeatGeek. And, you know, you could be next to see your favorite artist, comedian, or play. Like, there's over 70,000 events to choose from. And that's because SeatGeek and the Daily Dip are still giving away up to $1,000 in tickets, and you should definitely enter today if you haven't already. You just add code PDS to your SeatGeek app profile, and it gives you a chance at the weekly $500 giveaway. No purchase necessary. And $1,000 prizes are available to Daily Dip subscribers who add code PDS newsletter, doubling entries and winnings. But then, as far as yesterday and those comments, almost everything was about that first story, where the old white couple that had 5 adopted black children that they allegedly were using as slaves. And y'all had so many things to say. Lori saying all children deserve parents, not all parents deserve children. Others saying adoption is already an expensive and difficult long process. I truly hope adoption agencies do an excessive background check on every every parent. Though others chiming in there saying our foster care system is notoriously horrible. Making it out of that system with a reasonably loving family is so incredibly rare. Odds are most foster kids grow up in the foster home. This story is not the first of its kind, and it won't be the last. Meanwhile, you had folks like Ash sharing, I have 2 adopted children. They were in multiple foster homes before we found each other, and some of the stories of what they went through still enrage me. And adding, people are often quick to point out how kids in foster care have problems and are tough to parent, but I feel like it's not as publicly known just how awful some foster parents are. The difference is foster kids are spending their formative years without a real sense of stability through no fault of their own and against their will. Foster parents are making their own choices and failing miserably. And the foster care system is so underfunded and neglected, the caseworkers have so little power to actually have a strong impact against these types of things. Abbreviated review sharing, I've grown up and lived in West Virginia for 30 years, and I'm myself a black man who was adopted, so that first story hits pretty close to home. It's hard to believe it went on for so long. I've read that the neighbors called the police several times, but they didn't do anything about it. They were called months before and only responded after the 3rd instance of someone telling them directly that they were locking children in that shed with a padlock. Meanwhile, you had Learning Still saying, 1, that those 2 garbage cans are disguised as humans, but adding 2, the most concerning part is that the adoption system is so desperate to alleviate their overcrowding of children that 5 of them were adopted to the same people and no follow-up was given. There is a lot of negligence going on here, and someone needs to do a deeper investigation. But ultimately, y'all, all that disgust and anger, that ends up being where today's show is going to end. And from there, I will be sending you off into the night for the first presidential debate, whatever that's going to look like. CNN's been promoting their very specific rules a lot before the debate. I'm very interested to see how it's going to play out, but I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. And so for now, where I'll leave you is how I always do. My name's Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here next time.